Bhakti, apart from preaching those simplistic ideas and easily comprehensible ideas such as the purity, truth, honesty, devotion, charity, etc., which could hence attract the masses towards this movement, you also find that it was not just reliant upon any simplistic or singular attitude of God. It did not portray any idea related to God which appears simplistic and which also appears singular in its attitude towards God. If you take a comparison here of Sikhism, it simply said that God is an incarnation of love. So whatever we have in the form of God is God of love. On the plank of such simplistic idea, the Sikhism arose. But here you have a situation where the devotion was not confined to a simplistic or singular attitude towards the God. And here they could brought themselves into various notions of devotion. Devotion can be in varied forms. That's where this assumes very significant. You know that there was deification of Krishna which has been done, Rama which has been done, Shiva which has been done, and this devotional religious culture that was inculcated by these bhakti saints, shook the very foundations of the ritualistic dominance within Hinduism. It could do so because this devotion or bhakti could take varied forms. What are those? You observe that there is a devotion which appears as if one is showing his servant's attitude towards the master. As you see in the case of Hanuman's devotion to Rama. They call it what is called as Dasya Bhava. You also find that this devotion takes the shape of that of a friend to a friend. You observe this particularly in the case of Arjuna towards Krishna. We call it Sakhya Bhava. In the language of Bhakti movement. Third, you also see a parent's attitude towards his or her child, which can be shown in the devotion of Kausalya towards her son Rama. We call this Vatsalya Bhava. And it can also take the shape of attitude. Of the beloved towards his or her lover. As you see in the case of Radha for Krishna. We call it Prema Bhava. The emotions and feelings which are inherently seen in any individual were given this shape of devotion, and it was easy for these bhakti saints to attract such feelings, as it is a natural aspect of any human being. And as you see, once you focus on these natural aspects of any human being, the possibility of having any scope for discrimination on the plank of one or the other prejudice, and any scope for dominance of any ritualistic practice would simply evaporate. And you know that whatever those hymns or poems or songs which were written in the local dialects, but not in Sanskrit, helped the masses to arouse these natural emotions and feelings that lie inherently. And this is how, since the arrival of Bhakti movement, it has led to the emergence of a very rich corpus of devotional literature in many regional languages, local dialects. This is a significant contribution of the Bhakti movement. And as you know, in spite of such various ways of deification of various lords, still Bhakti movement, taking cues from the Upanishad philosophy, emphasized on one God, that is a kind of monotheism. And apart from this, Bhakti movement was not just confined to these some local masses, the lower classes of the society. It did attract even the priestly class. It did attract even those who are in the aristocracy. That means its influence has swayed, cutting across the various sections in the society. For example, we have seen this Krishna cult which has been developed by Chaitanya Prabhu. Chaitanya was a Brahman, and he had a large chunk of Brahman followers. Mirabai was from aristocratic class, but she attracted many sections of the society. This was one of the very fundamental social features of and social consequences of Bhakti movement. In a way, in this path which was laid by the Bhakti movement, it could blur those distinctions which the society had. It is in this context of its thorough involvement into the society, its thorough penetration into the society, we have to see the arrival of Sant Kabir and also Dadu. We see Kabir emerging he also brought out some of aspects of spirituality where, as against the popular notions that we see, probably he rejected the magical practices. He rejected the bodily exercises, the asceticism, which are part of many sects. With which Kabir was associated by some of the mythical legends. In fact, Kabir in his life was constantly traveling around this region of Banaras, and he was directly in touch with many Hindu saints and Sufi saints. Probably he believed in this Bhakti and Sufi idea of unity of God. For example, in Sufism, you have this expression, Wahadat al-Wajud. Which means unity of being. These ideas of unity of being would revolutionize one's spirituality. However, one must remember that in his lifetime, Kabir has relentlessly and continuously fought against both Hindu and Muslim ritualism. And apart from that, whatever the prejudicial religious practices which were there, which were leading to a kind of fanatic attitude amongst these religions. And third, he definitely fought against the emerging and emerged distinctions within the society. So he believed in what is called as Nirguna Brahma, which is characterized by two qualities. One, it is of transcendental nature, and two, it is also of immanent nature. That means he was drawing heavily from the Upanishad philosophy. Second, he also equated, as you observe, both Ram and Rahim. He equated Hari with Hazrat. He equated Krishna with Karim. That means it took the Bhakti movement in such a way that it became a unique religious experience in the Indian subcontinent itself. And at the same time, you observe that Kabir was denouncing the idolatry. He says that this worshipping of idols, worshipping a stone, is all mechanical. He held whatever those prayers or pilgrimages or fasting that Muslims have in their religious aspects were also equally mechanical. He influenced both of these religions simultaneously on a large chunk, on a larger degree, in such a way that, as the legend goes, after his death, he had both Muslim disciples and Hindu disciples who could not agree about how his corpse must be disposed. Where one would want to bury that corpse and the other would want to cremate him. In this entire context of stimulating the social sensitivities, stimulating the individual sensitivities, Kabir must be seen from his literary aspect. You very well know the couplets that he wrote. These couplets are called as Doha or Kabir ke Dohe. They clearly state that there is only one God, and whatever the differences that we see either amongst the God or amongst the people within the society are all artificial. Third, he says that all these differences, either in terms of God or in terms of people, were deliberately created by people. And hence, all these differences that you see in these social institutions as a resultant of these differences that people have brought out are unnecessary for one's salvation. He went on to hence convey that taking bath in holy waters, going to Kaaba and mosques, going to Makkah, going to temples, practice of worship, whatnot, whatever the various ritualistic oriented practices that these religions have, he held that they were useless. He also held that whatever the religious leaders, priestly class that you have, they're trying to expose their superiority learning with their bookish knowledge. They're trying to parade whatever that book learning that they have without in fact understanding what this God is, and hence he says they are misleading people with the false images about themselves which are being created, which is also unnecessary. In fact, he kept so much in tune with these masses that he was equally against this material wealth. He also forbade his disciples from going to the royal court. That means, on the one hand, where we see that he was influenced by both the Sufi doctrines and also Hindu philosophical conceptions, but on the other hand, you also see that there are certain precepts of Sufi ideology that he tried to deviate from. There are certain ideas of Hinduism that he tried to deviate from. For example, Kabir does not mention in his entire text about the obedience to God. He says that, and he stresses upon the concept of surrender to God. He also rejects these ideas of reward and punishment. While accepting the Sufi doctrine of divine judgment and the principle of this self-effacement. Abul Fazl mentions very fondly about Kabir and his popularity. And similarly, many other bhakti writers, for example, there was a writer named Nabhajit who writes in his book called Bhakti Mala, which is written in 1600 AD, puts Kabir in the high list of preachers of bhakti. And he puts Kabir at such a high position that he was totally against any rules of inequality, and he always emphasized the unity of God. You also had this Sant named Sant Dadu Dayal, and even in this case you find that most of his biographic details are shrouded in those mythologies and legends which are created around him. There are many tales. Remember, Kabir was a married person. Similarly, Dadu was also married. Kabir was an illiterate. Similarly, Dadu was also an illiterate. Kabir was a householder. Dadu was also a householder. Kabir taught in that simple, very simple Hindi language. Dadu also chose his preachings to be told in that very simple Hindi language. This is where both have certain commonalities. You know, similar to Kabir, Dadu was also very prominent in both Hindu and Islamic tradition. In Hindu tradition, some of his disciples remember him by calling Vruddhananda, whereas in the Muslim tradition, he is also called as Budhan, or Hindi what we call as Buddha. Dadu was so famous and as legend goes that he appeared in the form of an aged ascetic and he knew what is called as divine truth. It so happened that Raja Bhagwan Das, who was there in the court of Akbar, one of the very leading dignitaries that we see within the court of Akbar amongst this entire fraternity of Rajputs in the Akbar's court, became his disciple. As we see in the case of Kabir, even Dadu travelled widely. He also went to Banaras. He also travelled in Bengal. You see a community of singers known as Baul singers in Bengal, B-A-U-L, Baul singers. These are very much attracted to the teachings of Dadu. And even today we see that there are many references to Dadu in the songs that they compose, in the songs that they render. Just like Kabir, Dadu was also a monotheist. He believed in this unity of God, and he also believed hence that there is no difference between Hindus and Muslims. That's where he used to always call himself neither a Hindu nor a Muslim. His preachings, just like Sikhism, are also referred to as what is called as Bani. In his Bani, Dadu reiterates that either Ram or Govind or Allah, whoever it is, they are all spiritual leaders, spiritual teachers. He did not believe in that authority of scriptures. He did not believe in any kind of those ritualistic practices that these religions have. However, he did believe in the value of that self-realization that one must have in order if one has to achieve what is called as salvation. That means he says that one must divest oneself of all those senses which lead to what is called as ego, and then one must ensure that there is complete surrender to God, just like Kabir. And as we see in the case of Sikhism, Dadu also takes this idea that God resides in the hearts of all men and women. And union with God was possible only through your love, devotion and service to other man. That's where he says, be humble and be free from this egoism. Be compassionate and devoted in service. Be a hero, fearless and energetic, to keep yourself completely engaged in enthusiasm in what you do. Similarly, free your mind from sectarianism. Free your mind from the forms that are meaningless. Free yourself from the semblance of religion. Be forgiving by nature and be firm in your faith. These are the statements which are a gist of what Dadu is. So being householder, just like Kabir, he also believed that the natural life of a householder was best suited for the spiritual realization. They did not hesitate from staying away from this household life. Kabir also has done that. And at the same time, to reinforce this cultural reality, he wrote widely in this Hindi prose and poetry. And in fact, he has encouraged his disciples to write in that language of people, whereby people get admired by these ideas while staying within this course of being a household. They can revolutionize themselves with these characteristic features that Dadu taught. This is where he admitted both Hindus and Muslims to his discipleship. And whatever the imagery that these two create, they would create a kind of bliss whenever you render their songs. As they believed that the devotion to God should transcend the religious or sectarian affiliation and that devotees should become non-sectarian, it gets reflected in their renditions. Given these entire teachings that Kabir and Dadus had in terms of whatever the philosophy and spirituality that they propounded, in contradiction to that, where despite their opposition towards such sectarianism, after their death, you find that a sect gets formed by his devotees. As you see with other religious movements where the doctrine that was propounded by the spiritual leader or religious leader and the practice that emerged after the demise of the original teacher, they did not conform with each other. Once this sect has emerged, we find that these Kabirpanthis and Dadupanthis started observing some practice of ritualism. So these original teachings of these spiritual gurus got modified And this created definitely a contradiction with their teachings. However, in spite of this, their contribution towards questioning the social structure, which is characterized by either caste or communalism or both, which, as you clearly know, will be the deliberate attempt by those very powerful and dominant sections of the society to create such social hierarchies within the society, were shaken by their preachings. So the legacy that they have left behind is a very significant aspect from the point of view of the development of the secular cultural aspect of the Indian subcontinent. Without losing sight of the reality in India that we are religious by nature. They didn't reject any of these religions. But by preaching that monotheism, they call for unity of all those people, asking them to blur these religious differences. And it is in this sense we have to emphasize that they believed in those basic religious principles, but they were never swayed away, they were never under the garb of these rituals, scriptures, which induced a kind of fanaticism and restrictions within the society. It is these ideas of both Kabir and Dadu, who were illiterate, who were married, and who were also preachers, who preached oneness of God, rejected any kind of division and discrimination within the society, and undermined the fundamental reasons why these discriminations have emerged, which is fundamentally the rituals that are essential to both Hindus and Islam. However, their ideas of tolerance, their ideas of orientation towards this expression that we use in the modern sense, secularism, definitely laid the foundations within the society through their very simple religious preachings, very simple spiritual preachings, very simple social preachings, in that easily comprehensible, simpler ideas which have been given the literary form in that simpler Hindi dialects. This is where, even though these Kabirpanthis are not the the Dadupanthis, were prominent in the society because of these attempts to blur those divisions in the society, even amongst the religions, did not move long. However, these ideas have remained within the society, irrespective of which religion and which community that you belong to. That's where the success of both Kabir and Dadu must be looked at. And this was true even during this period of the decline of this mighty Mughal empire. How do we know this? Whatever the writings that you find in terms of either bhakti or the Sufi movements, for example, as you see in the case of Sikhism, they draw heavily from these two. Guru Granth Sahib and its Bani contains preachings of these two. Guru Arjan Dev gave a lot of prominence to these teachings. As I said, when Kabir or Dadu give this clarion call of God as being an incarnation of love, that's what even Guru Nanak Ji was suggesting, preaching. That means the influence was profound. In spite of the fact that these followers have faded over a period of time, the influence couldn't fade. That remained at the roots. This is how these two must be understood. In Hindi literature, they identify these writings of Kabir in various terms. For example, they call them Shabad. Few of his writings are referred to as Pad. Few other writings are referred to as Doha. Few as Sakhi. In one of his Doha, he says, "ऐसे वाणी बोलिए, मन को आप खोए, औरों को शीतल करे, आप भी शीतल हुए." See how simple it is, but how profound its meaning is. In Hindi literature, he is referred to as a Rahasyavadi Kavi. While being so, he is also referred to as a very great sant, a saint. A saint, by being a householder, he understood those difficulties of every householder. If you call him in Hindi संत जो जीवन के कठिनाइयों से भरा हुआ था, it is in this secular context that we must place these two saints. You also find within his writings how he discards those imageries that we build for ourselves. In Hindi, they call it the दोहे, जो आडंबर को मिटाने के लिए लिखे गए थे. Similarly, you find the writings which are completely against those irrational beliefs. There is one dohe which is very famous. Which is the first doha that he wrote, probably. पाहन पूजे हरि मिले, तो मैं पूजूं पहाड़, याते चाकी भली जो, पीस खाए संसार. Pahan means the patthar, stone. Hari means Bhagavan, the Lord Almighty. You know Pahad, what Pahad is? Pahad is the mountain. If idolatry is showing you who the Lord is, if idolatry is so powerful, then let me not pray and praise that small stone of God. Let me praise that bigger stone of God, such that My surrender to such a bigger stone will appease the God much more. See how in simpler terms he is discarding the entire idolatry. In a way, he is trying to convey that absorb only those ideas because of which the entire society can benefit, the entire society can live in peace and harmony. Discard all those ideas because of which your life itself becomes impossible. So he's asking you to churn yourself in those simpler understandings. What you have to search here is not those luxuries or not those rituals that you are oriented towards because of such idolatry. The search must be intrinsic. By questioning what you are doing, the search must be about yourself. That's what this particular doha is all about. In one more doha he writes, लाली मेरे लाल की जित देखूं तित लाल, लाली देख मैं गई मैं भी हो गई लाल. In literature we call this Anupras Alankar and Upreksha Alankar. By drawing comparison and contrast, they bring enormous philosophical meaning into it. Lali means those luxuries that you associate with the Lal. Lal means Prabhu. Lali mere Lal. The luxuries have been associated with the Lord. You garland him. You make huge prasada for him. As much as few thousands can eat. You make him wear all those luxuries you want in your life. But he says, कि जित देखूं तित लाल, meaning जितना भी देखूं उतना लग्जरी, उतने आडंबर. लाली देखन मैं गई, meaning what? I wanted to go there to see those luxuries. That's what the problem is. I haven't gone there to see the Lord, to see that luxury. And by looking at that luxury, I am getting amazed. And they are becoming the Lal. Mai bhi ho gayi Lal. That means rather than the Lord, this luxury has become the Lord. This is where the significance of his efforts to bring into the light the importance of God lies. By focusing on what is called as utmost devotion in the form of your surrender towards the God, whatever that you have as part of your material wealth, all that belongs to God. So even if you are showing such luxuries towards the God, it is this identification that All this luxury also belongs to God, whereby you can have your neutral outlook towards such luxuries, such that it will have a profound social impact. What is that? You will not discriminate either on any social grounds or economic grounds. Because even if you have luxury and even if someone else doesn't have any kind of luxury, you identify that this belongs to the God, and hence those distinctions can be blurred. He also writes in which he questions many systems. The systems which have far-reaching impact in various ways. He writes, आए हैं तो जाएंगे राजा रंक कफीर फकीर, एक सिंहासन चढ़ चले एक बंधे जंजीर. See how simple it is. You might be either a king or a fakir. Who is a fakir? We see this term associated with whom? The Sufi tradition. Fakir is the one who is clad with those long dress, gowns. And also, you find him always on the move. Always on the move. In search of truth, and also in enabling others to lead such a path in search of truth. You might find a king who might have sat on the throne, but on the other hand, you might have also found a saint who has by choice chosen this path of being in search of truth, where he may also set himself incarcerated in a jail. But ultimately what he wants to convey in this particular doha is, आए हैं तो जाएंगे राजा रंक फकीर, एक सिंहासन चढ़ चले एक बंदे जंजीर. Death is true for everyone. If you understand that death is imminent and true, as Steve Jobs says, the time that is available for you within this gap, within this period, is very less. Don't waste that time in all those which doesn't either show you truth or which it doesn't tell you the truth. Reform yourself in such a way that you lead a life of success, not against anyone, but against yourself. Against the illnesses which are making you suffer. When you understand these, even when you are in the throne or when you are in a place which is a place of incarceration, imprisoned, you don't find any difference. You will be as much as happy when you are incarcerated as much as you were when you made to sit on a throne. In this sharp contrast again, he brings that secular aspect of life and how those extremities of life would be there for any householder. You must not be swayed away by these extremities of life. You must do your function to the core. You must act to the core. माला फेरत जुग भया फिरा ना मन का फेर, कर का मन का डार दे Manka Manka fair. Again, we call it Anupras Alankaram in Telugu, where you use that single expression, either a or ma or ka or da, to reflect what you want to convey. Mala means what? Mala means the one that you hold in your hand while you do that meditation. The means that you use to perform that act of meditation. Fairat means what? You are rotating it continuously while performing that meditation. He says, while doing so, it is not this mala that you are trying to rotate. You are trying to rotate the entire creation of this creation of the God that has been done over a period of time by the God, which is continuously happening. Even though you are making it revolve, you are unable to revolve your heart. Whatever that instrument that you have to use in terms of heart, it is not clear. That means what? With all those ill-faceted thoughts, with all those self-contradicting and ridiculing thoughts having filled in your mind, whatever you do in terms of such practice, they won't yield any result. They won't give you that peace. That's what he wants to convey. So in the next line he says, Karka Manka Darde. Karka means the hand. Manka means the garland that you are holding, the instrument that you are using for performing this act of meditation. Karka Manka Darde. Throw it out. By throwing out what you are holding in your hand to rotate or revolve, you take up your heart and brains. Manka means mala again. Rotate that, churn it. You find that in the first statement, man and ka are separate, but in the second statement both are united. Both give you different meanings. In the first expression, man is your heart. In the second expression, manka means the garland, the mala that you are holding in your hand. It's not the one you have to churn that you hold in your hand, but it's the one that you have to churn which is there in your heart. See how beautifully in this so-called Anupras Alankar he brings in so much of contrast, and so wonderfully and in a profound manner he portrays these ideas. It is these ideas which have been found their penetration in and around these areas of Banaras in the Awadhi language, Awadhi dialect. Their impact is so profound. You never see here these though applicable to a particular religion, a particular sect, a particular community. They are so secular. That's where even though these Kabirpanthis, as the followers of Kabir, did not found their continuation after the demise of Kabir for a prolonged time, however, these ideas remained as it is even today. Keeping your mind and heart pure, keeping your mind and heart stable, Intrinsically, you have to search yourself, but not about all those external things which you show, which probably showcase to some other person that you are in search of something. Discard all those dramas in your life. That's what he want to convey. This is where even during this period of decline of Mughals, as I said, having these ideas penetrated into the religious forms such as Sikhism, penetrated into various vernacular writings that you see in various languages, in Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam. The impact of Kabir ke Dohe was profound. It did not remain the local. It is in this context I wanted to talk about its significance in this entire decline of the Mughal Empire, how in spite of the social churning which was happening, these ideas were already there within the society. Is there any question?